So anyway, so let me bring up the PowerPoint slide. I have kind of done some revisions to the PowerPoint a little bit. You may have seen like edited versions of it on Canvas. The one I've got now today should be the one to use for pretty much this week and for the upcoming Canvas quiz and exams later. So let's first talk about the Babylonian Empire. It's called all kinds of names. The Babylonian Empire, like if you go to this slide right here, they sometimes call it the Paleo-Babylonian Empire, which means in Greek, Old Babylonian Empire. They call it that because there's at least two major Babylonian empires that dominate Mesopotamia at one point. The one of Hammurabi's, which is usually called that one, and then they also have the other one, which is later called the New or Neo-Babylonian Empire of King Nebuchadnezzar, which is around the 6th century BC. So much later. And so that's why they give it those different names and all that. Now, this particular empire was a Semitic empire that was around about 200 years or so. Peaked about about 1800 to 1600 BC would be more or less about the time period of when it was. And at one point, this empire dominated most of Mesopotamia, from like most of Iraq all the way up into Syria, up here where the Euphrates River Valley is. And they were based around a capital and city that was called Babylon, which is right here. Babylon is an ancient city which goes back almost 4,000 years ago. It's actually a name that's derived from Greek and Hebrew. I think the Greek name is Babylon, basically, or Babylon, might be how they actually say it, Babylon. And of course, from the word Babel, which in Hebrew meant confusion, because if you remember the story about how the Israelites, I guess in the Bible, wrote about how God had saw all these workers that were building the Tower of Babel, and he didn't want them to build it to heaven, and so he had them speak different tongues or different languages, so they couldn't, finish it. And so the word confusion is where the word Babylon kind of comes from originally. This empire itself was made up of different peoples. Akkadian, of course, was the main peoples it was made up of. We already talked about the Akkadian Empire. Those Semitic people, they were the kind of leftover people from the Akkadian Empire that had dominated Mesopotamia. And then you had another people, they were called the Amorites. Most of the rulers and nobility were from that people, Semitic people. The Amorites were a type of Semitic people that originated from Syria. They came down into Iraq and eventually conquered it. And all the kings, were basically Amorite that ruled, including King Hammurabi. There was about 12 kings, or around 12 kings that ruled over the Babylonian Empire. And of course, Hammurabi was, the best known one, the founder of the empire and its greatest ruler. Of course, they believe he's the one that conquered most of the territory that you're looking at over here. So they believe he conquered the area around Babylonia, Sumer, and then also conquered up into the northern part of the Euphrates Valley. Of course, we already know about Hammurabi from the video, right? He is famous for his famous legal code system. The Hammurabi Code is a type of Babylonian legal code that was developed in the early part of the 18th century BC. And it was considered one of the first major law code systems that was developed in the world. The Sumerians had some earlier law codes. I think under King Ur-Nammu, he had his own code. But this one was more famous and obviously more expanded as an actual legal system. And of course, as you know, they were carved on these pillars that are called a stele, what you see right here. The original one, which was found in 1901 in southern Iran, around a place called Susa, the ruins of Susa. and it's now in the Louvre, of course, a museum in Paris, France. And evidently they would erect these in courtyards and temples so that people would, I guess, know what the laws were of the land. You'll notice over here there's a picture that's at the top of it. There's a picture with Hammurabi on the right, and then there's a god on the left they think was the god It was actually a Sumerian god named Shamash. Sometimes called Utu, U-T-U. And Shamash was the god of, it's like a solar deity. And he was also like a god of justice as well. So the Babylonians believed that the gods gave them the legal code and the laws. And I guess in the picture there, it looks like Shamash is actually giving the laws to Hammurabi. It kind of sounds like something out of the Bible, like Moses, receiving the 10 Commandments from God. And these legal codes and the Hammurabi Code, were highly influential. They influenced other, cultures to develop their own legal codes. Like in the Persian Empire, they had similar legal codes. They had, and in a lot of biblical codes, like in the 10 Commandments, laws in the Bible, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, are familiar to us overall. That's the head of Hammurabi from a statue that they found, I guess, in the ruins of Babylon. Yeah, there's about 282 laws that were carved into it, by the way. It was written in Akkadian cuneiform, about 3,600 lines. You can see on that black stone. And the laws pretty much cover just about anything you could think of on law, from wages, marriage, divorce, contracts, leases, perjury, debts owed, inheritance, slavery, crimes committed. They have crime and punishment and things like that pretty much written in the codes and all that. Most of the punishments for, breaking laws were either a fine, getting your hand cut off or something cut off, or death as well. So, yeah, the codes were pretty harsh, but that was the standard at the time. Pretty much they did that kind of stuff already overall. And the codes were not exactly equal. The codes, if you know much about it, were based on a principle that's known as eye for an eye, or I guess the term they usually use for it, which I'll write up here for you, is law of retaliation, which it comes from Latin, which I'll spell for you, which is lex talionis. Law of retaliation, of course, an eye for an eye. And that actually appears, like you saw, of course, in that little short video they talked about that's something that appeared, that's in the code. I think 196. Yeah, law 196 is the one that's eye for an eye, and there's also law number 200 that's tooth for a tooth. So if somebody basically knocks your tooth out, you can knock theirs out. So it's kind of a form of equal justice, or really equal compensation. That's probably more like what it was. So yeah, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, basically. Lex talionis, or law of retaliation. But the only thing about the laws, though, it wasn't exactly equal for everybody. Like if you were a lower status slave or whatever, sometimes the code was more harsher to you. So that's the only bad thing about it. So a lot of the upper classes were more at advantage. They might have to pay a fine. Like if you killed a slave or something, you might have to pay some fines or something, or pay for the slave. But they wouldn't execute you, maybe. You're upper class. So that's something that was true about that. Now, what happened to the Babylonians? Well, after Hammurabi died, he had sons and grandsons that ruled over the empire. Think about another, I want to say 4 or 5 rulers followed, and they were really weak. And so what happened was Babylon fell to other people, other states that came in. There's two that actually invade and defeat them. One is the Hittites, which I'll talk about first today before we move on to the Assyrians, who were in Turkey, who were Indo-Europeans. And they had the Kassites, you see right here. The Kassites came in and also sacked Babylon. They actually conquered it and held Babylonia for about 400 years before the Assyrians came in later. And they're not sure who the Kassites were. They think they came out of western Iran, where the Zagros Mountains are. And I think there's a theory that there's some kind of Asiatic peoples, but they're not sure if they were Indo-Aryans or they were Semitic. They're kind of this isolated language group that they can't figure out. But they were there for a few hundred years before the Assyrians came in. And after the Assyrians, you had the Neo-Babylonian period that would try to restore Babylon to power. But that's later. All right, then you had the Hittites that you had. The Hittites, which I need to talk about a little today as well. The Hittite Empire, of course, emerged next. And that started the Iron Age, which followed. So iron starts coming in and being used throughout the world. Who were the Hittites? Well, the Hittites, we've already talked about them from the lecture on Monday. Hittites were an Indo-European people that resided eventually in Turkey, which the ancient name for Turkey is Anatolia. They also occupied Syria for a while also as well. But they don't think the Hittites originated from Turkey, ancient Turkey. They believe they came out of somewhere in Eastern Europe. The popular theory, from what they've been able to figure out from archaeology, is that the Hittites originated from the southern Ukraine, somewhere above the Black Sea, and they migrated around the Black Sea into Turkey. They do have a capital. It's called Hattusis. If you go back to this map right here, you can see it's kind of in central Turkey, in Anatolia. Anatolia is like this area here. It's kind of in white right there. Hattusis. And interesting thing about the name Hattusis, they weren't called Hittite. Hittite is like the name in the Bible, like the Israelites called them that. They actually call themselves the Hatti, H-A-T-T-I, Hatti. And so that's where you get the name Hattusis from, of course. So I guess it means the people of the Hatti or the city of the Hatti, whatever you want to call it. And that's the origin of the name. Now, yeah, there's different periods of the Hittites. The most famous is the so-called Neo or New Hittite Empire. This is an Iron Age empire of the Hittites that dominated Turkey and Syria. It's like basically around the 13th, really 14th to about the 13th century is about the peak of it, of when it is. It's sometime during that period that the Hittites eventually figure out how to smelt iron. They were one of the first people to do this and start making iron weapons and iron tools. And if you know about iron, humans first figured out how to use iron from getting it from meteorites that had fallen from, of course, to the earth. And then they started figuring out iron ore. They can separate, ore from the metal. And they realized that they had to smelt it to a very high temperature, which, if you know about it, to smelt iron or iron ore, you have to melt it to a temperature of 22,795 degrees Fahrenheit, which is pretty hot. So I don't know how they figured that out, but they figured it out somehow, the Hittites and other groups. And that led to a whole revolution, and so the so-called Iron Age would, of course, follow. Then they got of course, they were, if you know about the Hittites, they were a rival state to Egypt. The Egyptian New Kingdom, which was led by like Ramses the Great, who was one of their great pharaohs, competed with the Hittites to control like the area around Lebanon, Syria. They got in a lot of wars between each other. And I think there was even a case where they sued for peace in like treaties and stuff like that. But yeah, the Hittites were famous for one of the groups that sacked Babylon, which may have been close to 1600. Hittites and the Kassites kind of finished off the Babylonians. Now, they don't think the Hittites lasted a long time. They think around 1200 they were attacked by these peoples that were called the Sea Peoples. The Sea Peoples were these seafaring Iron Age peoples that were somewhere in the Mediterranean Sea region. They appeared sometime at the end of the Bronze Age. They attacked like the Mediterranean, like the eastern part of it, Cyprus, island of Cyprus, Levant, which would be like Israel, Lebanon area, Syria. They also attacked Egypt. It actually caused the decline of the Egyptian New Kingdom. And then evidently it caused the collapse of the Hittites. In fact, their capital was sacked and destroyed by them. And so they're not sure who the Sea Peoples were. There's a lot of mystery about the origins of them. Some claim they were the Greeks that were coming down from like Europe and all that. Some claim they were the Philistines that were over here, like in Israel. I think there was even a theory by Herodotus that that they may have been people that came out of Turkey, like up here somewhere. They were called the Phrygians, or maybe from somewhere else. Were up in there, maybe up here on the Black Sea. But Herodotus talks about the Phrygians, I think, as another group that may have sacked that area. But so you had this so-called late Bronze Age collapse that you get afterwards. And so all these groups like the Minoans over here collapse, Hittites collapse, and the Egyptians for a while even collapse as well. And so that's going to allow kind of a vacuum to come in. And around here, you're going to, in Mesopotamia, you're going to get the Assyrians that will emerge, and they'll take over the region. So that's the next thing we need to get into and talk about, of course, is the Assyrians that come in. And yeah, who were the Assyrians and all that? The Assyrians were a Semitic people of northern Iraq and Syria. They were mostly made up of Akkadian peoples and other groups that were still in Iraq. And it's believed that Assyria went back like 5,000 years or so, and it's believed that they were founded around what is the upper Tigris River, around a city-state and city that's called Ashur, or also pronounced Assur. And so that's when the Assyrians kind of take off at that point. At that time when they kind of emerge, these other powers are bigger, like Egypt, Babylonians, Hittites, but over time they'll get bigger than them and they'll kind of even conquer them. Like you can even see here, the Syrians even sacked Babylon in the 13th century as a whole. But they did start out as a Bronze Age culture originally. There's like in the old Assyrian Empire, that was a Bronze Age period in history, which kind of goes for like 1,000 to 2,000 years, down to about the 10th, 11th century. But yeah, they are situated up in the upper Tigris Basin. And it's believed that sometime around the king Tiglath-Pileser III, who reigned about 9th, 8th century, it's about that time that Assyria becomes more like an Iron Age state, an empire. And what they'll call that empire later, of course, is they'll dub it the New or Neo-Assyrian Empire. And it'll have another city and capital that's bigger than Ashur, which will be Nineveh, which was a huge city that was close to 100 to 200,000 in population-wise, one of the largest in the world at the time when it did emerge. But those are the dates usually for the Assyrian Empire. It's usually about 300 years. Around 911 is when they think it started. And then somewhere there's kind of a debate about when it ends. 609, 612 is also a popular date. So that's when Nineveh got sacked. And so that's how long they last in the Iron Age period of Assyria. Syria is very warlike. They were, this empire was one of the most warlike in history so far. And they were known for their armies. The Assyrian armies were considered some of the greatest in history so far. Their armies were copied by other states later. The Persians, the Greeks, the Romans kind of copied their method of how they fought wars and conquered people. Their armies were well trained. They used mass conscription, not just Assyria, but other populations that they would force into their armies or use them as slaves. They had, of course, a lot of horses. They used horse cavalry, especially armored cavalry. Oh, they also used camels to supply their forces. They were the first to do that. Of course, they were the first to have a lot of use of iron weapons a lot in battle as well. They also invented the battering ram to knock down doors and so on. Movable towers. What they mean by that is siege towers that they could roll up to city walls to take cities. They're the ones that invented siege towers as well. Siege warfare, they were masters of it. They took numerous cities, conquered different civilizations. And so this particular empire was one of the largest in history up to this point. They even conquered part of Egypt at one point, the Assyrians. They even had a corps of engineers that would make things, build bridges. They even had an early road system or highway system in Assyria originally. Here's a map showing you of the Assyrian Empire, the Neo one anyway, but you can see that it would expand over time. Originally, it was in Iraq and Syria predominantly, and then over time, it would eventually expand to include part of Turkey, southern Iraq, Israel, and Egypt. Oh, another question I didn't talk about, which is true. Why were they cruel conquerors, the Assyrians? Besides their armies, which were really good, the Assyrians were known for mass deportations of huge populations of their enemies. So they would take the best people back, best men, the best women. They would conscript the men, use people as slaves. So that was something that the Assyrians were common for doing. And some of the other people, they might just kill them all, kill the rest off or something like that. And the best example I give you that with the whole deportation of enemy populations was Israel, like the Israelites. Israelites were deported, if you know about this, to Assyria, especially where Samaria is in northern Israel. And that's what led to that legend later of the, you may have heard about the lost tribes of Israel and all that. A lot of them were lost or absorbed into Assyria, and they were never seen again. Of course, they had religion too, which a lot of the Assyrian gods were kind of adopted from Sumerian and other gods. Like Marduk was big as a god. They still worshipped Anu and other similar gods, but they had some new ones, like Assur was a very popular god, which is their capital. But it was the same name, like the city and god were the same thing, the same name. And Assur was a war god of the Assyrians. And then the other one that's very famous is Ishtar. You see on the left in this picture. Ishtar became very popular. Originally, Ishtar was a Sumerian goddess named Inanna, and it was mostly a fertility goddess, but also a goddess of war as well. So both those gods were gods of war. They say Ishtar influenced a lot of the other gods later, like Isis, the goddess Isis in Egypt. They think Aphrodite in Greece may have been influenced by her. So that sort of looks kind of like a harpy with sitting on top of some lions there. So that's Ishtar. Now let's talk about some famous rulers of the Assyrian Empire that were big. Sargon II is considered one of the most famous of the Neo-Assyrian kings that they had. And Sargon, of course, had his name named after the other Sargon. I guess they knew about him. But he was famous for being an 8th century Assyrian king, and he was the founder of what they call the Sargonid dynasty. The Sargonid dynasty was a dynasty of about 6 Assyrian kings that reigned from the 8th to the 7th centuries, and it had several famous kings in them. Sargon II, of course, the founder, King Sennacherib, who appears in the Bible, and also King Ashurbanipal, was probably one of their greatest kings, one of the last good ones. And so under Sargon, pretty much by that time, Assyria is starting to take over most of Mesopotamia. They've taken over Syria, and they've also taken over most of also Israel as well. They've conquered a good bit, and I think they're pushing into part of Turkey as well. So, and then they have another ruler who was very famous, who was in the 7th century, who was King Ashurbanipal. And he's probably their last great king. He's one of the very few kings that was literate. And under him, Assyrian Empire peaked, like in power and in size. And a lot of people think he's like the last great one they have, because there's 2 more later that aren't that good. And one of the things that Ashurbanipal's known for is he expanded Nineveh, like he built a famous palace there, and he constructed a famous library there, which later was known as the Royal Library of Ashurbanipal, built in Nineveh. It was part of his palace complex. And this library was famous for being one of the first major libraries built in history. And evidently, Ashurbanipal collected all kinds of information from Mesopotamia, which were still in tablet form at the time. And so I guess going all the way back to Sumerian times, and they compiled this into a huge library at Nineveh. And they're not sure exactly how many tablets were there, but they estimate that it may have had as many as 20 to 30,000 at one point. And they did find later on a complete copy of the Epic of Gilgamesh. That's why we have the whole story, because of that library. So it's probably the most famous book that came out of it, and probably the oldest book that's still around. Oh, the library did influence Alexander the Great. If you know about this, Alexander, when he conquered Mesopotamia, found the ruins of it, and he decided to build his own library, and that was the famous Library of Alexandria in Egypt. And so that was the next library, I guess, that followed that copied, what they did under Ashurbanipal. Nineveh later was sacked, like in the late 7th century, around 612 BC. So mostly what's left of Nineveh is ruins. They have some parts of it, like that gate there, that's been really reconstructed today. Nineveh was built in the upper Tigris near what is Mosul, with Mosul, Iraq. That's where it's located. Some of the ruins that are there that are Syrian, tragically have been destroyed by ISIS. You know about that terrorist organization that I guess they broke up or whatever. So most of what's left of Nineveh, it's not much to it as a whole. What caused it to break up? Well, if you go back to the slide here, they believe a revolt broke out in the southern part of the Assyrian Empire. This is like basically years after Ashurbanipal died. And the Chaldeans, we'll talk about next, overthrew them, and they created their own state out of the ruins of Assyria. And that's the next thing we need to get into. We need to, of course, talk the last, of course, subject, which is the Chaldeans, that particular people, which are a type of Semitic people that will emerge also in Mesopotamia or Iraq. They're called different names. Of course, they're called Babylonians, the Chaldeans, but the Chaldeans were a type of Semitic people of southern Iraq. And the state that they will create will be called different names. They often will call it the Neo or the New Babylonian Empire. You can see it was a very short empire. It lasted about 74 years. It only had 4 rulers to it, which you can see, which the second one, Nebuchadnezzar, was the most famous of the 4 rulers. You can see the empire stretched at one point from Iraq and part of Iran into Syria, Israel, and then actually at one point they did control part of Egypt briefly under King Nebuchadnezzar. Why is it called Neo-Babylonian or New Babylonian? It's because Nebuchadnezzar, who was their greatest ruler, rebuilt Babylon as its capital and made it the center of his empire. And so basically this state was kind of seen as this reestablished Babylonian Empire. And they also call it that too because to differentiate between the old Babylonian Empire of King Hammurabi and then this new one of the Chaldean one under Nebuchadnezzar. So that's why they do that, so people don't get confused over which one is which. You can see he reigned a long time. He reigned from 605 to 562. So Nebuchadnezzar reigned like 40, 50 years. He was one of the longest reigning rulers, probably of Mesopotamia. And his father is the one that founded it. You can see here, King Nabopolassar. He founded the actual state after the revolt that happened within the Assyrian Empire. I think his father's the one that revolted and overthrew the Assyrians. And after he died, Nebuchadnezzar took over at the end of the 7th century. And then, of course, the state itself would go on to last about 74 years. Note on the bottom here, yeah, it is considered one of the last Semitic empires to dominate Mesopotamia. There's not much of that after that. So everybody else that comes in later is more like Indo-Aryan or Europeans. What is Nebuchadnezzar known for? Well, first of all, like I said, he rebuilt Babylon. Like he constructed like new walls around the city. He built a lot of the main gates to it. Like if you know much about the Ishtar Gate, that's a very famous gate that was one of several entrances into the city of Babylon, which you see there. That is a replica version of the Ishtar Gate, which is now at the site in Babylon. In Babylon, by the way, the site is about 60 miles south of Baghdad. That's about where it's located. And also they have another one, which is the one that's in Germany. That's actually the original one. Apparently some German archaeologists took it apart and brought it back, and they reassembled it. It's now in a museum. The Pergamon Museum, I think in Germany is where it's at now. And so they think that's the original part of the gate that was there. So it's kind of terrible what they did with that. But I'm sure they want it back, Iraq, but I guess they won't give it back to them. But that's basically what it looked like. And the gate itself honored the goddess Ishtar. It had like supposedly bulls and dragons on it. Also, one more thing I wanted to say about Babylon. Babylon, by the way, was one at the time when it was built under the Chaldeans. It was one of the largest cities in the world. It was, I think, close to 200,000 people lived there. So it was a very large city. I think that and Nineveh were almost that size. So these are pretty large cities that we're talking about at the time. Also, the other thing we mentioned before, we already did this already, but I'll mention it again. Of course, Nebuchadnezzar was very famous for his hanging gardens, Babylon ziggurat that he built on the east bank of the Euphrates River. And if you remember correctly, that was one of the 7 wonders of the world at one point, according to the Greeks. And it was built in the 6th century. And I think we talked about this before, but he built it actually for his wife, who was a queen, who was actually from Iran. I think her name was Ametis. And anyway, it was this lavish, it's kind of like a palace, really. And it had like, tropical like stuff like trees on it and plants and mechanical waterfalls on it. And it was considered a wonder of the world. And it was around for about 200 years or so until around the time of Alexander the Great, it collapsed due to earthquakes. So not sure if the Bible mentions about that, but Hanging Gardens of Babylon is something that the Greeks write about. Then there's one more thing Nebuchadnezzar is also known for. Of course, he's known for his conquests. Nebuchadnezzar mostly is famous for conquering what is the kingdom of Judah and what is the city of Jerusalem. Judah, of course, was this Jewish state or Israelite state that had survived the Syrians. The Syrians had already conquered the northern kingdom around 722. The kingdom of Israel, or what they call Samaria, and had taken them off, remember, to be deported to Assyria. And then Judah itself survived as like a vassal state to the Assyrians for a while. But after Nebuchadnezzar took power, what occurred was the kingdom of Judah fell out of favor with the Babylonians of Nebuchadnezzar. Why? Because Judah allied with Egypt, and that angered Nebuchadnezzar. And so Nebuchadnezzar tried multiple times to conquer Judah. He actually took him 3 times. He laid siege to Jerusalem, and then they believe around 586 he conquered it. And that led to the so-called Babylonian captivity, where the Jews were forced into captivity. He sacked and destroyed the Temple of Solomon as well. And there's like several books in the Bible that talk about the sack of Jerusalem in the Jews' Babylonian captivity. The book of Ezekiel, Jeremiah, book of Daniel, contemporaries at the time. And Daniel's probably the most famous of the 3 prophets. Daniel actually is in captivity in Babylon. Now, what happened to the Chaldean state? Well, after Nebuchadnezzar died, he had two more kings, like a son and a grandson, that followed next. The empire was kind of weak, and there was just this other state, which is the Persian Empire, that emerged, which was way more stronger in Iran. And so around 529 or so, what happened was the Persians conquered Babylonia. They took it and they added it to the Persian Empire, and that was the end of the Neo-Babylonian state, and pretty much any kind of Semitic state after that doesn't really exist. So we'll talk about the Persian Empire later. They eventually conquered most of the Near East, from Iran, Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Israel, Lebanon, Egypt. So they form a massive empire, the Persians, but we won't be talking about that today. Of course, that's part of a separate lecture I'll have later that we'll cover. This is pretty much going to end my lecture on ancient Mesopotamia. I will, of course, I will go ahead and review a little today as well. If anybody has any questions about the lecture, let me know. Either right now, you can send me a message. Nobody's in StreamYard right now, but if you're on YouTube right now, you can send me a message or something, and I can ask it if you have a question about it, about the lecture today on the second half of Mesopotamia. So while you're waiting for that, if you have a question, let me go ahead and just review real quick on the topics, of course, that we covered today. Now, it says, who were the Babylonians? The Babylonians were Semitic people of Mesopotamia that, of course, formed the Old Babylonian or Paleo-Babylonian Empire. They were related to different groups, I told you, mostly Semitic peoples that were either Akkadian background, or what is, of course, Amorite as well. The king that founded the Old Babylonian Empire, of course, is King Hammurabi, the one that was famous, of course, for his law code. And Hammurabi was the sixth of like 12 kings I told you about, and was their greatest ruler. And of course, the one that created the Code of Hammurabi. The Code of Hammurabi, of course, was a famous Babylonian law code system. It was a systematic system, extensive system that basically was there for everybody to read. And this law code system was eventually written on, you saw those stone pillars, which are called a stele, which you saw in the video. The one that's, of course, currently exists is in the Louvre, which is in Paris, France. And there were 282 laws that were carved on it. And the laws were based on the idea of what they call lex talionis, or law of retaliation, which meant, like I said, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. And it was based on the idea of equal justice or equal compensation. But a lot of times it didn't work out that way because of your social standing. I think I gave you examples of laws. A lot of these laws, of course, have been copied by other peoples. It's even, of course, in the Bible as well. We talked about the Babylonians. Who were they sacked by? Well, two people. One was the Hittites that came in from Turkey, sacked them. And the Kassites were another group that were in Iran. And the Kassites would take over Iraq for about 400 years. What was the origin of the Hittites? Hittites were a type of Indo-European people that lived in Turkey, which was called ancient Anatolia. They don't think they came from Turkey originally. They believe they were European-type peoples that probably came out of like where the Ukraine is, like somewhere above the Black Sea. So they eventually would migrate and take over Turkey close to about 1600, and they were also in Syria. We also talked about like what new technology did they mass produce first. They were known for developing iron technology from iron ore or meteorites, and that changed warfare forever. That led to the beginning of the Iron Age that would follow it would allow the Hittites to dominate Turkey and what is Syria, but other states would eventually conquer them. The Hittites were later wiped out by the Sea Peoples. They don't know what happened to that group, who they were, like the origins of the Sea Peoples. So it's kind of a mystery group, but they do know they were a type of Iron Age peoples that were seafaring, that were in the Mediterranean Sea. Who were the Assyrians? Where did they develop a civilization and empire? The Assyrians were a type of Semitic people that lived in northern Iraq and what is Syria, and they would develop the Assyrian Empire, which would dominate the Near East down to about the 7th century BC. Of course, their name originates from the name of their city. Their capital was, of course, the city of Ashur or Assur, which is in northern Iraq on the upper Tigris River. That's one of their first cities. It was originally a city-state. It became a religious center. Their god was also the same name of the city, Ashur or Assur, and Ashur was like a god of war of the Assyrians. Ishtar was very popular too. Ishtar was, of course, a popular Sumerian god that they adopted, who was a goddess of fertility and also a goddess of war. So she was really popular, especially among the women, like fertility, goddess of also like love, sex, things like that. Why were the Assyrians cruel conquerors? Well, they were known for their, professional armies that were, able to easily conquer and lay siege to cities. And then, of course, I told you that they were known for mass deportations of enemy populations, like what happened to the Israelites, of course, in Samaria. So I was talking about that. We talked about their professional army and all the new technologies that they invented that other people copied. What was the Neo-Assyrian Empire? It was the Iron Age period of the Assyrian Empire, which lasted from about 911 to about around 610. Lasted about 300 years, and it was the peak of the Assyrians in what is the Near East. The city that was the capital of it, too, out of order, but the capital of the Neo-Assyrian Empire became Nineveh, which I told you was at that time one of the largest cities in the world. And Nineveh was located, like I said, in the upper Tigris, like right close to where Ashur is. It's above Baghdad. Who were some famous rulers of the Neo-Assyrian Empire? Well, I told you there was Sargon II. He was considered one of their greatest rulers who reigned in the 8th century. He was the founder of the Sargonid dynasty, which was a dynasty of like about 6 Assyrian kings, including Sennacherib, and I told you about Ashurbanipal, who was probably one of the most famous later. What Assyrian ruler built the royal library of Nineveh? That was King Ashurbanipal, who was one of their last great kings who reigned in the 7th century. And I'll tell you how that library influenced other libraries. And a few more questions left. The Chaldeans, we talked about them. The Chaldeans were a Semitic people of southern Iraq or Mesopotamia. They emerged to take over and conquer the Assyrian Empire. And they formed a state that was later called different names, either New or Neo-Babylonian Empire, or some people just call it the Chaldean Empire. It was called that because it was this type of Mesopotamian empire that was reestablished around Babylon, and so they called it that. It was also called that because of the fact that they didn't want to confuse people with the old Babylonian Empire of Hammurabi and the new one of King Nebuchadnezzar. So that's why they differentiate the names. So it's all based on historical time and archaeology. Who is their greatest ruler? King Nebuchadnezzar II. He reigned for 40, 50 years. He was like one of 4 rulers of the Chaldean state. And I told you how he was known for his building projects, like rebuilding Babylon in its city. And he also built the Ishtar Gate, one of its main gates into the city. I also told you he was also known for building the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which was a famous ziggurat in Babylon that was built for his wife. And I told you how that was considered one of the Greeks' 7 wonders of the world. He was also known for destroying and conquering the kingdom of Judah in Israel in around 586 or so. And he destroyed the Temple of Solomon. And that, of course, led to the so-called Babylonian captivity, where the Jews were forced to be under Babylonian captivity for like several decades. Then I talked about the Old Testament a little bit, the famous books that write about Nebuchadnezzar. At least 3 that are big are Ezekiel, Jeremiah, and of course the most famous is the book of Daniel as well. And so that's pretty much it about that with the study guide. Now, does anybody have any questions about the lecture? So nobody has put any questions up about the left of anybody. Somebody might have a question about it. But anyway, so let me know later on, like if you don't have questions now, let me know any questions or comments you have about the lecture. Now, you remember you do get bonus points for that. I don't know if y'all remember that or not, but I think some students are forgetting about that. But any kind of comment or question you send to me on YouTube, you do get, bonus points for that. So send me any kind of, questions, comments you have about it, good or bad, about the lecture. That's fine with me. I don't really care, to be honest with you. So don't be scared about that, about doing that, trying to participate with that aspect. So before we go today, a few reminders. Remember, Monday, we don't have class because of Labor Day. So there'll be no lecture that day. I will probably have an assignment, which will be a Canvas quiz on ancient Mesopotamia, which will be for this lecture and the one on the previous one from Monday, August 31st. So make sure you look over both lectures that I got on my YouTube channel. and on, of course, the Canvas announcements on that. Also, don't forget to complete Canvas quiz number 1 on prehistory. Okay, that's in quizzes. That's due this coming Monday. I'll send out reminders about it to you to try to remember to do it, because I've been trying to do that every day to try to get you to keep up with that and all these assignments that you'll have later. Then don't forget, if anybody has a book report topic they want to send, like the title, which book they want, let me know. Email me about that also as well. And then lastly, if anybody's interested in the Veterans Project, let me know. Is there a deadline for the war veteran interview? Not really. I mean, if you find somebody who's a veteran and can do it, that's fine with me. Yeah, just let me know if you find somebody and you want to do it. I could put you down. I could put you down for now if you want, on the list. But just if you find somebody that's good, to do the project. Okay, so it is worth a lot of bonus points if you want to do it. So that's it for today. I hope y'all have a good evening. Hope y'all are staying safe out there, of course. But like I said, let me know if you have any questions or comments you have about the lecture, like through YouTube comments, basically. And so y'all take care, and hope y'all have a good weekend and Labor Day. So y'all take care. Bye.